This is Caminantes, where you are invited behind the curtain of the 2021 CAMINOS Festival and into the creative minds of this year's Caminantes.
Think of this podcast as the theater lobby, where people can mingle and talk about the incredible art they're creating.
What can we offer to the world?
When we let go of those expectations, that's when everything kind of becomes possible.
Theater should be giving us something that screens cannot give us.
Right now, I just want to speak my truth.
We need to tell each other stories, and we learn from telling each other stories.
In this episode, you'll hear two conversations. First, we'll hear from the artist behind Universo de Textos, parte 1 a 6, and 12 liters and 8,800 steps. Let's get started.
My name is Sofía Ontiveros, pronoun she, her, and my piece is called Universo de Textos, parte 1 a 6.
My name is Anita La Selva, and my piece is called 12 liters, 8,800 steps. Sofía, when I read about your piece, looking at dealing with personal stories and how do we then create art out of that, I'm very curious for you, is each time you revisit a piece or a part of that history, that personal history, how does the narrative change each time you go back to it? Because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's been one of the most challenging parts of doing this piece, because it's based on many texts, and some of them are from years ago, from when I was a teenager, and I've structured them in a certain way that makes sense to me and makes sense to different cycles that I find there have been in my life. And the hardest part was revisiting some of them and realizing I don't connect to this anymore, but it's very valid still, what I felt in that moment and my perspective in that moment. So it's definitely been a learning process for me, because I realized how much I've changed throughout these years and how I still keep changing.
Yeah, because it's so interesting bringing in the personal, right? Because when we bring in the personal, it's combined with so much of who we were then, who we are now, who we're evolving into, right? Because we are a sum of all of our experiences, right? Everything, even though some experiences I think that sometimes we feel that we don't connect to as deeply now, but they are the experiences that have shaped us and shaped who we are and how we see the world, right? And how we are in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering, how does magic realism in your film inspire the movement and choreography / text and videos? Or is it vice versa? Did the creation of this piece just instinctively inspire a world of magic realism?
Yeah, that's a big that's a big question. Oh my God. There is this sense of this relationship that I build with a horse, right? Where there's this horse that sort of talks to me, not talks to me like this, verbally, but talks to me telepathically. So there's that element of me going through that. And yeah, so for me, when I thought about the piece, I was inspired by how we process things and how do we process and how do we heal ourselves. And for me, it's this relationship with the horse, which is it's not necessarily real. Well, it is real because there is a real horse in this film, actually, which is kind of cool. So for me, I always visioned the piece as having that combination of hardcore text that's based in reality, and then this kind of a much more fluid, what is this relationship with the horse? Sometimes we can't say everything with text. And I think that's, for me, it's based on my experience with horse therapy, equine therapy, where you work with horses and they don't say anything, but their body language and the way they move and how they connect to you and how they physically move into your space and how they connect. So that's what really inspired me, was when I was working with the horses, going through this therapy, was how the horse's body would move and then how my body would move. And then I thought, well, as an artist, how can I take that into a bigger picture? How can I expand on that? And how can I take these very simple gestures, movements that the horse would do, and then how I would respond? And I thought, what if this became bigger and this became a conversation that I could actually put on stage?
Just like you, Anita, I wanted, this piece started with me doing it live. I did part one and part two live at a small show at a park. And when I was back home during the pandemic, I was like, I should revisit this and maybe videotape it and see what happens. And it's definitely been a learning experience because I've done very few like camera work and like directing films. So it definitely was very new to me. And it's hard to like, I'm also a perfectionist. So it's very hard for me to like watch myself in video and like tear apart every single part. But it's definitely taught me a lot of like letting go of like the expectation of something looking exactly the way that I wanted to.
Yeah, it's letting go of expectations, right? Like that's so much of what this COVID has been is letting go of expectations. And I feel that when we let go of those expectations, that's when everything kind of becomes possible. We just let go and go, okay, let's just live in the moment and see what comes and see where it takes us. And yeah, this film is different from what I thought it would be. It's going to be different from what I thought it would be. And it's not even finished yet. And it's still going to be different from when we finish editing. So yeah, it's kind of exciting though.
I wanted to ask, how do you translate text into movement? What is the process?
It's very instinctive for me. It's just, I see the text and I start coming up with certain motifs that I find in the text. And based on that, I inspire also motifs for movement. And I feel like I create this also like this space. That's why I called it Universo de Textos, because I feel like I'm creating this little world that I am in and like I am moving around it with my texts.
For me, it's always what is the emotion and what is the story. So I was never, I learned lots of moves as a dancer when I trained, but I always found that really difficult. And when I was able to connect to an emotion or story or an idea or an image, that's when the movement would come naturally for me. So my movement is less, I wouldn't say it's dance, it's more physical theater movement, kind of movement choreography that is connected to the text and a lot of gesture work. I work a lot with gestures. It has to be organic for me because again, I'm not a trained choreographer. So for me, it always has to connect to what is coming out from inside, what needs to be spoken from inside, what is the gesture that needs to happen that cannot come out on text.
And both of your pieces are very personal. How do you approach creating a performance from something that's so personal? Like, do you think that there's a line that you need to like create in theater, or are you not interested in that line?
I think that's definitely something that I've been struggling with when it comes to this piece, because I don't think I've ever done a piece that is as personal as this one that I'm doing. I don't think there necessarily has to be a line, depending on where you are at, I feel emotionally. I feel like for me right now, I just want to speak my truth, but I've never really shared my movement work as much along with my personal texts, which I think are also valid to share. And I think it's also like opened me up to not consider myself just a dancer and a mover, but also an artist for all forms, an actor and such. So I think that part of the vulnerability has really opened my work into other areas that are not just movement.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Sofía said about the personal being so vulnerable. Like I create a lot. I create as a creator, as a director, an actor, a lot of different roles and shows that have to do with vulnerability. But this is the first time I'm actually dealing with something so personal, and it's really vulnerable and it's hard. And I think everyone knows where their own line is. Like what I'm talking about is like this is 5 years after the fact. And I could not have created this piece the year after everything happened, all this stuff was going on. I'm 5 years down the road from it. So I've been able to process, I'm still processing. I'm still been able to process, to heal, to understand better. And so that's how I can keep myself emotionally safe when I'm doing this, because I understand what I'm doing now. I can see it with different eyes and also with a more resilience in my body, my physical body, to bring up all those things again, to go through them again, because as you know, Sofía, when we work on the personal, we have to bring it up again. We have to bring it right in there and let it live right in us. And so I think that each artist has to know their own line. So yeah, for me, I don't have a line. I feel like my line was not so much emotional, but psychological, that had to do with fear of being judged and fear of what people would think of me, and not necessarily my own vulnerability. And that was a big line that I had to jump over and say, get out of. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this piece, is because, you know, whenever we talk about personal, any kind of trauma, any kind of whatever, abuse, sexual addiction, stuff like that, and mental health, there's always this kind of stigma. And I'm kind of tired of that. And I think that people should be able to create pieces and talk about it. And that's one of the reasons why I push myself to say, let's just talk about all this shit and get it out and get the shame and the judgment out. So for me, that was more my line than the emotional line. I was ready to go there emotionally, but I wasn't ready to go there psychologically and socially. And now I've kind of been able to drop that and say, let's just speak the truth, as Sofía said. I think you said that beautifully, Sofía. I want to speak my truth, and that's what I want to speak right now. And I think that when we speak the truth, there is like incredible creative energy in that sometimes we don't even realize as artists until we actually have the courage to stand in that truth and breathe it and go, okay, this is what I got. This is me. And then everything starts sparking, and everything starts to the possibilities open up, because we've taken the lid off, and we've taken the lid off holding it down. So because we've taken the lid off, possibility opens up. The minute we keep things hidden, we hide them, we don't show them, we don't share them, that just crushes our creativity. And the minute we're willing to put all that vulnerability out there, the creativity then starts to bubble up.
I completely agree, especially with the parts that like many of these things I wasn't like a couple of years back. I don't think I would share them the same way that I would share them right now, where I feel like I've reflected more and I feel more at peace with myself emotionally. And with that, my movement has also changed. I see like videos of me choreographing like years back, and I can see the amount of instability that was in my head, just like watching myself move, and like how everything that I was letting out was also like driven from like a place of like I couldn't say it out loud. I just could say it with my movement in that moment. And now I feel like my movement is more at peace and more calm and reflective, because now I feel like I can speak out more and I can let out my words, and not just through my movement.
That was Anita La Selva and Sofía Ontiveros. Next, we'll hear from the creators of Party People, I Love the Smell of Gasoline, and One Perfect Day, Un Día Perfecto.
Hello, I'm Margarita Valderrama, and my show is called Un Día Perfecto, One Perfect Day.
I am Jord Camp, and my piece at CAMINOS is called Party People.
My name is Claren Grosz, and my play is called I Love the Smell of Gasoline.
Basically, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, as we head into like the fall and this next phase of the pandemic and the world and whatever theater and live art is evolving into, like, what can we offer to the world? Like, what are you craving out of an art experience? I know it's a hard question. Does it make sense?
It totally makes sense. That's why it's hard.
It can be abstract. It can be vague. I'm just curious what people want right now, you know, like.
I feel like even before the pandemic started, I was really on this track of like theater should be giving us something that screens cannot give us. Otherwise, what's the point? Like anything that a screen can do, a screen will do better. Like they just have better budgets, better tech. Like it's just, you know, naturalism is for the screen. So when I'm looking at theater projects that I'm interested in, both as a participant and a viewer, I'm looking for something that's going to be experiential. And that can be broadly interpreted, because I do think there's some room for realism, but like it's got to have, like when you go to a concert, there's something in the air, right? Like there's an electricity in the air. And I think that theater, if it doesn't have that, then there's no point in it.
I agree with Claren. Like we're constrained to screens now. And so how are we going to like achieve this elusive, ethereal magic sauce that we have in theater? And yeah, very similar to Claren, like even before the pandemic, like when I would see a very natural or naturalistic show, I was like, okay, but I feel like, you know, you gave me a wide shot of like a kitchen, and now I watched that, but like, you know,
just 1 hour and a half long wide shot.
I want a very long wide shot. I'm like, okay. And then you switch the sets a little bit, so now we're in a different wide shot, but like, you're not going to be able to take me to like a forest on a set, like on the theater. But if you can make me like smell the forest, or if you can make me see, like, just sensorially feel it, like, that is almost more magical to me than actually seeing the trees or whatever. So I guess all I'm saying is I agree with Claren.
I just want to jump on that and add, like, what you're just saying. I think it's also the art of illusion. Like, I think that like the theater for me requires like some spectacle and some magic. And I mean, like, quite literally, like magic tricks. Like, it should be like, there should be a moment that you're like, wow, like, how was that accomplished? I feel like this actually leads me into my question for Jord, which is that one of the things I'm really excited about with your piece is that it is like very experience-based. And I'm wondering, like, as a theater creator who can obviously go on about how I want experiential theater, I still struggle to get away from script-based theater or from a more traditional process. And so I'm wondering, for you, what does your creation process look like, particularly the first chapter of it, like the 0 to stuff to work with? What does that look like?
I feel like it just starts with like ideas and feelings, and like kind of like what we were just talking about. Like, I just want this kind of thing. Or maybe it's songs or outfits. A lot of times it starts with the outfit. Actually, oftentimes I do start with like a form. Like for this piece, it was like, okay, it's COVID, we had to be distanced, but we want to do something live and outside. So like originally it was one audience member. We're going to have a synced up audio track. The audience is going to be in this circle. And so that format and being in the park, then everything kind of came from there. So like, okay, how can we use the park? Okay, what about this? Okay, we're going to need some like meditations and things for them to do while I'm changing. And like that. So it's sort of like the form of it informs a lot of it when I work. So.
Well, Claren and I are in the middle of like recording me as like various different people with green screens and all this stuff. And, you know, I think it's funny because I've been reflecting on it, and like when I have Claren on Zoom and I'm recording and we're doing these ridiculous shots where I'm like 3 different men or like all these other people punching myself, throwing up on myself. It's amazing, and I have the best time. And then it's all the stuff kind of around it, because we're in a digital format of like the editing and like making sure that we have all these, like, just kind of maybe the producer brain stuff that I've been struggling with. And so I was just curious, what has been your biggest challenge in making and birthing this this work you're going to share with us?
We had a 5-day rehearsal scheduled, and the morning of the second day we got an email from buddies being like, there may be one person in our office who maybe caught COVID. And so like the risk was really low, but we had to be transparent about that. And if we were all being honest about risk, like it wasn't worth it to continue. So we had 2 days canceled of that 5-day rehearsal, where the last day was for filming. So we ended up, like, the first day was just, you know, like team building kind of stuff. And then the second day was throw a whole thing together. And the third day was film that thing. So definitely our biggest challenge was like COVID interfering with our timelines. No one had COVID in the end, which is great, but it did really screw with our schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, working in the park has its own challenges in terms of like the weather and other people in the park and like the kind of unpredictability of that. But I have to say, I think it's kind of like just like the ongoing loneliness of this time and how we can't be with other artists in the festival. Everything's complicated. You know, COVID is constantly throwing us curveballs, right? So, you know, a lot of time working on this is just me and Liz in the park. We're dragging everything to the park. It's like just not having the resources we usually have to like be in a theater and like have bathrooms and have a roof and have like, do you know what I mean? Like, just like having to do everything from scratch. And like I feel like I'm getting exhausted of that, where it's like, I don't know what I want to do anymore. Yeah, exactly. Like I would rather just be in the room with some people and like have people to feed off of and see more shows and be inspired. I'm missing that.
I find that feeling has also led to like a level of procrastination on my part that I've never experienced before. Like
that.
I was always that person that was like, I'm on top of it. I've made the schedule. Like I'm going to do all this work, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, pretty much since this started, I just have a really hard time like motivating myself to be like, okay, like edit it. Like you have the footage now, like edit it. I'm like, no.
It's hard. Thank you for saying that. I'm also finding that it's easy to procrastinate and it's sometimes hard to get motivated these days.
But deadlines help. I mean, the fact, like anytime that I'm kind of dangerously procrastinating, I'm reminded of the fact that we have this festival and I have to show something. So that definitely helps. But in fact, yeah, like when I was trying to write this by myself without deadlines, it was almost impossible. Like if I didn't know that someone was going to have to read it or see it or whatever, like I just didn't have the motivation to do it.
I get that.
What are your hopes for the future?
Oh, that's such a big question. I'm going to answer my hopes for the project because that seems smaller. And my hopes for my project for the future is my project talks about like Western alienation and climate crisis and the end of the oil and gas industry. And I'm from Alberta. I'm in Alberta right now, actually. And my hope is that my piece offers bridges for understanding between these two sides of Canada. That, I mean, I think Canada is a massive, massive country and full of independent little identities. My hope is that my piece provides some pathway for conversation and understanding between what can feel really unfathomable about a different province. That's my hope for my project's future.
My hope for the future is that people are kind to each other and that we can gather again and be really radically kind and empathetic to each other. There's an element of our project, of my piece, that's about like the future of queer gathering, the future of parties, or like whatever that means, like of gathering together and kind of imagining what the future of queer nightlife, but also just gathering is going to look like. So my wish for that is that we can find ways to be really gentle and kind, and that we can gather in the future more, and that we can move through all the pain and all the loneliness that we've experienced in the past 18 months or whatever it is. And also the piece is also kind of going in a bit of a different direction, where I, like on a personal level, I really want to make something that's a magic cathartic experience for the audience, but also kind of embodies a bit of the just sort of confusion and chaos and dissonance of this time.
I think broadly, I hope that the muggles, as I called them, the non-artist folk, kind of realize how we're all, like, artists are essential to like this world. We all turn to screens, we all turn to stories, whether that was like on TikTok for 1 minute, like you're telling me a story in that 1 minute, or if you're watching a whole film, or if you're you know, watching a whole show in a day. Like we I think as humans crave story, and I think that's why we also gravitate towards one another. I want to hear your story. I want to hear like what you have to tell me about your experience in this world. And I hope that this illuminates that is like an essential part of being human. Like we need to tell each other stories, and we learn from telling each other stories.
That was Jord Camp, Claren Grosz, and Margarita Valderrama. All of the artists in today's episode are bringing their new works, which are still in development, to the CAMINOS Multi-Arts Festival.
This year, CAMINOS is presenting the art of 32 different groups, both live and online, from October 12th through the 24th. Go to caminos.ca for more on how to see this show and to support this artist. Gracias a Benies Guerra and New Tradition Music for the theme song.
We are speaking to you from the shores of this beautiful Zagaigan, known to some as Lake Ontario, in Toronto, or Dagarondo. This is the ancestral territory of the Haudenosaunee, or Longhouse Confederacy, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum and Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase.
Araluna, We remember that people can begin to heal when they are hurt. We are committed to artful participation in disagreements. We are committed to unsettling ourselves towards connection, respect, and justice for all people who now live in the city, which has been a meeting place since time immemorial.
Radio Aluna Teatro is produced by Aluna Theatre with support from the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Department of Canadian Heritage, and TD Bank.
Aluna Theatre is Beatriz Pisano and Trevor Shelness with Sue Ballant. Radio Aluna Theatre is produced by Mónica Garrido and Camila Díaz Varela. For more about Aluna Theatre, visit us at alunatheatre.ca, follow at Aluna Theatre on Twitter or Instagram, or like us on Facebook.
Miigwech and Nyawangoa.